Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. I'm Pinky Webb. Today on the program, the Budget Department submits its proposed 2023 national budget to Congress. Critics are questioning the budget cuts and increases in some agencies.
We would like to defer to the wisdom of Congress on this.
Lawmakers renew calls to abolish the DBM's procurement service.
If we clean the process and the system of the procurement in PS-DBM, maybe we can go back to its old glory.
Budget Secretary Amenah Pangandaman joins us live. The House Appropriations Committee has started the hearings for the proposed 5.2 trillion peso national budget for 2023. The House is targeting to approve the spending measure on or before September 30th. Next year's proposed budget is 4.9% higher, or 244 billion pesos more than this year's budget. Let's go straight to the source of the story. We have Budget Secretary Amenah Pangandaman. Secretary, it's good to finally have you. Welcome to the source.
Good morning, Miss Pinky. Thank you for the invite.
Okay, so we're talking about the budget. Napakakapal po ng budget nito, but obviously there will be some concerns or areas that the people would want to understand, such as myself. I understand, of course, that this budget supports the 8-point socio-economic agenda of President Bongbong Marcos. We're talking about the first few would be education, infrastructure, health, and others. Let's start with the biggest bulk of the budget. It has not changed. So the budget on the education department. So this is at 852.8 in total. Ano ho ito, no? Kasama na lahat. That is DepEd, obviously the state universities and colleges, and I believe also vocational courses. But I want to stick first to DepEd. They will get a budget of 710 billion. That is up from 633 billion this year. Pero, Secretary, they were asking for 848 billion. Hence, there is a deficit of about 130 billion. Sigurado na hubang hindi nila matatanggap yung kanilang hinihinging original budget for the DepEd?
The Department of Budget and Management po, when we prepare the budget, we have a level that we have to consider. The level po, at least for the 5.268 trillion, was prepared po and agreed upon by the members of the DBCC. This is DBM, DOF, and NEDA. And then as we go along during the budget call po, there's what we call tier 1 of budget. These are recurring expenses like PS and other MOE. And then there are projects that are under tier 2. Ito po yung new projects that we want to consider po. However po, in doing that po, there's really a fiscal space that we have to consider. Yun po yung una-una, that's the number one that we take into consideration. Second is the absorptive capacity po of the agency. We assume po that what we fund po are shovel-ready projects po. So, of course, if we already submitted the budget po to Congress, again, we submitted the good wisdom po of our members of the Senate and House if they would wish to consider the increase po of the budget of DepEd. So,
from my understanding, Secretary, Tier 1 is almost like the basics, what is really needed, and Tier 2 would be the additional. So let's talk about this because
yes,
face-to-face classes, that's back by November 1, that will be, or November 2 rather, full-on face-to-face classes. There is a backlog of classrooms, which is more or less, if I'm not mistaken, about 40,000 a classroom shortage. And of course, kailangan pa po mag-hire. Ang dami hong kailangan gawin. In every agency, granted, more teachers, even more counselors, guidance counselors. Would you say that because they are short of over 100 billion pesos, that these shortages in classrooms, getting more teachers, hiring more teachers, counselors, etc., non-teaching personnel. Could this be compromised because of the deficit?
I think hindi po because bulk of the we propose the budget, the funding, but bulk of it really is on the implementation. If I may share po, I think it's not, we already have a plan kung ano po yung mga areas that lacks classrooms and maybe the school facilities. However, it also takes time po to procure one. It has to undergo bidding process. It has to go several permits. It has to go detailed engineering design. So ito po may mga detalye po that sometimes it's beyond the control of the agencies. In fact po, as of now, what we saw po from the absorptive capacity or utilization, especially in terms of the basic education facilities or the construction of and restoration of classrooms, only 44% po has been used po and utilized for this year po.
I see.
So siguro po if with DBM po, while we fund the budget, we also make into consideration po yung yung implementation po ng ating mga programa.
Right. So you're saying there's still savings, is that correct, Secretary, from the budget this year?
There's still money po that they need to obligate and disburse po.
And amounting to how much?
Kasi po as of now, what they've already obligated is about 40%
I see.
of their total budget for this year. And then we are not, in my accounting po, in our accounting, it doesn't consider yet those projects that are not yet, I think, obligated from 2021 that needs to be obligated this year po because it will lapse po.
Opo.
Otherwise, the money will be returned to the treasury po.
Ibabalik po nila sa Treasury. And in other words, Secretary, these funds need to be utilized by this year. And we're talking about funds for 2021 allocated to the DepEd. I guess it's a concern, Secretary, because there was a report also that almost 1 million, about 900,000 students actually transferred from private to public schools. But this is not, I'm not talking about this year, but this happened since 2020. So the concern there would be definitely we need more facilities, we need more non-teaching and teaching personnel. That's why I was very concerned about that cut, sa kanilang hinihinging budget. Although, for the most part naman, yung hinihinging budget hindi naman ho talaga nabibigay ng buo.
Opo, hindi po nabibigay ng buo at we also check po yung implementation po ng mga proyekto po.
So
Kasi
may
kung
pera.
marami pong may iwan na pondo at hindi po natin may implement or magagamit, sana po na ibigay na lang po natin siya dun sa mga mas ready po na mga proyekto in other agencies po.
Right. But so let's go to state universities and colleges such as the University of the Philippines. This has made headlines. A 3.3 billion cut, is it, in the University of the Philippines system, NPGH. Magkasama na po ito. Let's talk about UP first. A budget down to 2.5 billion. Why was the decision to cut the budget for the University of the Philippines?
Generally po, if we look at the budget po, there have been an increase in almost all of the departments if we compare it to 2022 NEP. However po, during the process po of deliberations in Congress, meron pong, sometimes of course, the Congress would like to increase the allocation of the budget of the agencies. Kasama po dito yung UP. The increase po were not taken into consideration for the 2023 because these are non-recurring items. Most of this, at least for the UP system po, most of these po are infra projects which are already being implemented and already funded. So the money is already with them, and since it's 2022 budget po, the expiration will be until next year po. So they have time to finish it and it's already funded po. Now, in the case of UPPGH po, it's the same. Most of the additional budget po that was given to UPPGH equipment, medical supplies as a result po of the pandemic. So these are what we call non-recurring items po. So pag nabili na po natin siya, wala na po tayong kailangan bilihin ulit sa susunod na taon po.
Pero bakit po nila isasama sa kanilang budget kung ganun po yun? Yeah, parang, can we try to make it a little bit more digestible? Ang pagkaintindi ko po sa UP, ang sinasabi niyo muna sa UP system, nagkaroon po ng cut dahil may mga infrastructure projects na isasama dapat sa kanilang budget sa 2023. Pero nandun na po sa 2022 budget na pwede na nilang itap at gamitin. Am I understanding it correct, ma'am?
Yes. Yes po. Nung 2022 po, kung ano po yung napasa sa Kongreso, medyo malaki po siya compared to what we provided during the 2022 NEP. Nagdagdag po sila ng mga proyekto na mostly po yata parang mga infrastructure po to, capital outlay, na napa-obligate na po nila. So at nabigay na rin po yung buong pondo. Minsan po kasi meron po sa DBM na if the project is quite huge po, what we do po is we give them MICA. Ito po yung multi-year. But some of the projects po under UP for their infrastructure budget, they were given the entire amount po. So meaning they will be able to use the money until next year until they finish the project po.
Hindi sila makukulangan ng pera dun sa proyektong hiningan nilang pondohan.
Yes po.
Okay.
Yes po.
So, but doon sa PGH, you were saying it's the same. There was about a 900 million cut in the budget. It's a little interesting here because their union was saying that, I hope I still have my numbers right, parang dapat ata 5 billion. They were saying, dapat nga dinoblehan nyo pa yan yung budget ng PGH na gawing 10 billion. Pero nagsalita naman po yung PGH spokesperson, si Dr. Jonas, and he actually said that we have more than enough. What is really the story here siguro dito sa PGH po?
Again po sa PGH, most of the increase po during the 2022 General Appropriations Act are one-time expenses po or non-recurring. Most of it po, when we saw the list po of the upward movement of the budget, these are mostly in the capital outlay forms or in equipment po that will be used during the pandemic po. So naturally po, hindi na po natin kailangan pondohan yon. And of course, we are also thankful to PGH po, the director, that because they also know po that when we craft the budget, we also take into consideration po yung nila, really their absorptive capacity po and utilization.
It's not as easy, I guess, no, Secretary, to just look at the numbers and compare na, bakit itong 2023 NEP o budget nila mas mababa compared to 2022? Because parang that's the surface. But really, one needs to look at the fine print, kumbaga, kung ano yung mga breakdown nito, bakit bumaba o bakit tumaas in a particular agency. Before we go on a break, just a very quick follow-up question on this. Si Congressman Rufus Rodriguez who kasi is urging the DBM to restore the cut dito po and submit possibly an erratum or errata. Does the DBM see this happening? And of course, we're still talking about the UP system and the PGH.
We can no longer do this po. We already submitted the budget po, the President's budget or the NEP to Congress. So we really defer, ma'am, to the Congress if they may wish to increase the budget of UP PGH and the UP system.
So you can't do this anymore because he was saying that this was done in the past.
Yes po.
Hindi nyo na po gagawin. Okay, we'll be taking a very short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Pinky Webb. Our source today, Budget Secretary Amenah Pangandaman. Ma'am, at the start of the interview, I said that the budget really supports the 8-point agenda, socio-economic agenda of the President. And it talks about food security, transportation, clean energy. So let's talk about food security. Here, it shows that the budget for the National Rice Program actually increased from 15 to 30 billion. Tell us why. What was the reason for a 100% increase in the National Rice Program?
I think the general reference po is the medium-term fiscal framework that the president presented during the SONA. We actually wanted that what he mentioned during the SONA, what he envisions the country to be during the SONA reflects po the first budget of President Marcos. So among the 8-point agenda po, we have the 4 pillars po, and included in this is in strengthening the purchasing power of peso. And to be able to do that, we need to increase po our funding for the agriculture sector. And kaya nga po, para po magkaroon po ng mas mababang presyo po ng ating mga pamilihin at saka pagkain po sa hapagkainan.
Yeah, that is good to hear. But I guess the question is why a 100% increase? What can we expect maybe? I don't know if you would be the right person to answer this because I know this would be the DA. Pero it's very, siguro ang laki ho ng increase, 15 to 30 billion. And then, meron po of course yung pangako ni Pangulong Bongbong Marcos when he was campaigning that he wants to bring down the price of rice to about 20 pesos per kilo. Does this take into consideration probably subsidy for rice for the public in general?
Yes po, meron po. In our budget po, at least for the National Rice Program itself, we have provided a big amount for the National Rice Program, and this is for the expansion of fertilizer support po for our farmers. And then included din po dito is the support po for the mechanization of the industry, and at the same time po, while we provide po yung mga social safety nets to our farmers, we will also increase funding on research and development and also on post-harvest facilities po.
But again, let me repeat my question, Secretary, I hope you don't mind. Would this possibly include some sort of support or for rice to go down to 20 pesos per kilo by next year?
Ang support po nito is para po sa mga farmers po
Okay.
natin.
Hindi po
Hindi
subsidy.
po para sa individual po na bibigyan ng pondo po para po makabili ng rice po. Ito po yung generally po support po sa mga farmers natin para po tumaas yung kanilang productivity po. By increasing their productivity po, tataas din po yung output ng kanilang mga saka po.
Opo, so low cost, high yielding, kumbaga, tulong po ito para
Yes
sa mga
po.
magsasaka. It's not subsidy para po sa general public na makabili ng 1 kilo ng bigas at 20 pesos as promised by the President during his campaign. Okay, another point that needs to be discussed. Infrastructure, of course, very important. DPWH at about 272 billion. But puntahan po natin si DOTR, 161 billion. The DOTR was saying that this budget actually does not include the libreng sakay for next year, which they pegged at 12 billion pesos. Ma'am, bakit po hindi ito sinama? Sigurado na hubang walang libreng sakay next year dahil wala po silang budget?
The Libreng Sakay program po, I think is an effort po of the government this year para po to temper the effects of the high fuel prices po. During the DBCC po, and in coordination po with the Bangko Sentral, who is our resource person, we expect po that the fuel prices next year po will temper and will go down. So kaya po hindi po natin siya napondohan na for next year.
So wala talaga. Pero I think, weren't they appealing for additional funding for libreng sakay next year? So basically, is it correct to say the DBM is saying right now it's a no?
Wala po tayong na-provide na budget. Although I think during the budget deliberations for the Tier 2, they requested for funding. However po, I think what they submitted is still incomplete because it is not a regular program of DOTR po. So maybe
Opo.
hindi po kumpleto yung nasubmit nila and we have a timeline to beat. So hindi po
Ah,
siya talaga naisama
I
during that
see.
time.
Kasi dito siya sa tier 2 that you were trying to tell us about. So, talking about incomplete, Secretary, also a big issue. It's been an issue for quite a while. What really is going on between the DBM and the Health Department with regards to the allowances of the healthcare workers or those who were involved during the pandemic? Meron pong one COVID allowance na tinatawag na OCA. Ang tagal na po nilang hinihingi ito. While some have received them, the others haven't. The Department of Health is saying the DBM must or should or is appealing for the DBM to release, and the DBM is saying that we don't have the proper documents. Ano ho ba? Kasi at the end of the day, the ones who suffer are the ones who are supposed to benefit from this. Please, pakilinaw po ito sa amin.
Sa DBM po, meron po kami tinatawag na complete staff work po, and we cannot release funding po if there are no documentary requirements given to us. Tama po yan. The Department of Health already sent the request for the additional funding para po sa health workers natin. However, we returned po their request recently because principally po, kulang po yung dokumento that they provided. First of all po, parang hindi po nailagay doon sa listahan po kung sino-sino po ang mga claimants at saka beneficiaries. We think po from our end that's the most important document po that we need before we can process the release of the budget po for the health workers po.
It becomes a little confusing.
But we've already reached out to them.
Opo.
And we already sent them a letter indicating po yung mga kulang na requirements po that they need to submit to us. So we are still waiting for the documentary requirements po so we can process po the release of funds.
So, parang hindi ho kasi kompleto yung dokumento kaya hindi kami makapaglabas ng pera. This is basically what you're saying. But when did you tell them, when did you send them the letter that they needed to add more information to substantiate the release of funds?
Immediately po. In fact, I think wala pa pong 1 week, we've already sent them a letter requesting them to submit to us yung documentary requirements.
I see. Okay. Ayuda, also very important. Pag pinag-usapan ho yung ayuda, madami dyan eh. But puntahan ko na lang po yung sa number 1 for the DSWD. How much budget does the DSWD have? And ito ho bang ayuda magpapatuloy, especially for the 4Ps?
Yes po. At least for DSWD po, the total ayudas po for various social assistance program will reach up to 165.4 billion pesos po. Ang total ayuda cash assistance program po natin under the 2023 budget will total to 206.5 billion. It's an increase of actually 3%. And the DSWD component po is 80% of the total cash assistance program of the national government.
We're actually
yes,
showing
we will
that, Sec.
continue po the 4Ps program po of the national government. In 2022, we provided them with 107 billion. So in 2023 po, we increased it to 115 billion po. This will give cash grants to 4.4 million poor households po.
Pero
yung
yung
listahan po ng
Right,
DSWD.
which also they're trying to clean, according to Secretary Tupa.
Yes.
Pero ibig sabihin, ma'am, just to be clear, kasi we're showing it on screen, itong 165 billion pesos na ayuda, lahat ho ba yan pupunta lang sa 4Ps?
May certain amount po na mapupunta po sa cleaning po nung listahan. Pero very minimal, but most of the bulk of the budget po talaga will really go to
The 4Ps.
cash assistance to our beneficiaries.
Because every year po yan. So what happens now, ma'am, to what they've given as education assistance? Where in that proposed ayuda for under the DSWD will they be tapping this from?
The budget po kasi is a one big budget po under the DSWD for cash assistance. So I think it's up to but they will have to come up with I think a menu of identified beneficiaries po doon sa ating 4Ps po. So that can be in the form of a cash
Okay.
assistance per family or a cash assistance for health purposes or even cash assistance for ano po for our students.
All right. Again, we need to take a very short break. We will be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Pinky Webb, our source today, Budget Secretary Amenah Pangandaman. Secretary, I still have a lot of questions. I'll stick to two issues. Number one, PS-DBM. Sabi nyo nga, bigyan natin ng pagkakataon nito, not your exact words, but after all the controversy, ma'am, pag-usapan po natin, formally, laptops, merong pambago, yung sinabing 3 billion na na-invest na sinasabi ng mga COA, PS-DBM, you're not in the business of investing, you're in the business of purchasing. First of all, why do you want to continue this? Do you believe that there was a lack of credible leadership in the past and hence a better leadership this time would improve the situation?
The PS-DBM po was created by law and meron po siyang purpose. Ang mandate po niya is to procure yung mga common use supplies of the national government. Ano po yung common use supplies? These are the basic requirements that we do in our day-to-day activities. Ball pens, notebooks, coupon bonds, and all. I think the reason perhaps is first to generate savings po because of economies of scale po. When one agency buys it in bulk, so it will be cheaper for the government to buy it. As an example po is during the time po of Secretary Jokno, we raised in fact 18 billion worth of we incurred 18 billion of savings po just because of a procurement of common use supplies po. Maybe from our part po kasi kasama po ng DBM, another attached agency is GPPB. Ito po yung isang opisina who handles po or who checks the IRR of the government procurement act. I think as we go along po, we wanted po sana to at least reduce po the discretion of the people working in PS-DBM po para po magkaroon po tayo ng safeguards in our procurement process.
But why the problems prior to you taking the helm at the DBM? Kasi nga po, I identified them. And would you say that it's okay for the PS-DBM to invest money in high-yielding investments para po kumita? Tama ho ba yun? Is that part of the mandate of the PS-DBM?
Hindi po siya kasama sa mandato ng PS-DBM po. That's why po when COA flagged their observations, Attorney Dennis Santiago made a statement already that they will look into the books. Of course, he also entered and still in the transition stage of looking into the books of PS-DBM. But we will, Attorney Dennis Santiago will definitely return the 3 billion pesos, including the interest po.
Sabi nga nila, it's not just the principal, ma'am, it's also the interest kasi nga high-yielding supposedly ito. So, you're still hoping to retain PS-DBM, but ano ho, better and improved, ganun ho ba?
Yes po, we will try to line up a few reforms po. Una-una po is of course yung digitalization po, because we'll do it as a whole government approach. We will get in touch with the Government Procurement Policy Board to provide safeguard po in terms of procurement para po yung sinasabi po natin to reduce po discretion of our back members and the procurement process po.
Sayang na pati yung fail-sis. I wanted to discuss that. But Budget Secretary Amenah Pangandaman, ma'am, we've run out of time. Maraming salamat po sa inyong oras. I hope to interview you again in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Ms. Pinky.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.